The year is 1200 CE. While Europe was building its great cathedrals, another civilization was creating masterpieces that would one day become both a source of pride and profound loss. Deep in the rainforests of what is today southern Nigeria, the Kingdom of Benin was emerging as a dominant power, its influence radiating from its capital city, a settlement that would eventually captivate European visitors with its grand boulevards and sophisticated urban planning. By the 15th century, the Kingdom of Benin stood as one of Africa's most powerful states, a realm where art and power were inextricably linked. The Oba, or king, was considered divine and ruled with absolute authority from his palace compound in Benin City. According to royal court records, it was under Oba Iwa the Great, who ruled from 1440 to 1473, that the creation of commemorative brass heads and plaques began, a tradition that would flourish for centuries. The bronzes were more than mere decorative objects. They were historical documents recording the dynasty's lineage and achievements. They were political instruments, displaying the kingdom's might to visitors, and they were deeply spiritual artifacts, connecting the living monarchs to their deified ancestors. The Royal Guild of Bronze Casters, known as the Igun Eronwon, held extraordinary status within Benin society. Their craft was considered sacred, their techniques closely guarded secrets passed from father to son. The process they mastered, called lost wax casting, required immense skill and precision. Wax models were sculpted, encased in clay, and fired, the wax melting away to leave perfect hollow molds for molten brass. The reign of Oba Ezige from 1504 to 1550 marked a golden age for Benin art. As Portuguese traders established contact with the kingdom, bringing new materials and influences, the bronze casters adapted, incorporating European motifs while maintaining their distinctly African aesthetic. The plaques that lined the palace halls became more elaborate, more technically sophisticated, a testament to the kingdom's prosperity and creative genius. But what was the true purpose of these masterpieces? What stories did they tell to those who understood their visual language? And how could objects of such cultural significance come to be scattered across the world's museums, thousands of miles from the palace they were created to adorn? By the late 19th century, the world was changing rapidly, and the Kingdom of Benin found itself in the crosshairs of British imperial ambition. The scramble for Africa was in full swing, European powers carving up the continent in their quest for raw materials, markets, and geopolitical dominance. In 1885, the Berlin Conference had formalized the rules for colonial expansion, and Britain was determined to solidify its control over the Niger River basin. For centuries, Benin had managed its relationships with European powers skillfully, controlling trade and maintaining sovereignty. But by the 1890s, British colonial administrators in neighboring territories grew increasingly frustrated with what they called obstructionist policies of Oba Ovonramwen Nogbaisi, who had ascended to the throne in 1888. Captain Alan Malpas Boyce Ragan, commandant of the Niger Coast Protectorate Force, wrote in his 1897 account, "The King of Benin has persistently refused to allow white men to enter his city and has hindered trade as much as possible." What Boyce Ragan failed to mention was that the Oba's resistance stemmed from legitimate concerns about British encroachment on Benin's sovereignty. In January 1897, Acting Consul General James Phillips decided to force the issue. He organized an expedition to Benin City, ostensibly on a diplomatic mission to discuss trade. In a telegram to the Foreign Office dated January 9, 1897, Phillips wrote, "I am certain that there is only one remedy, that is to depose the King of Benin from his stool." His true intentions were clear from the start. Despite warnings that the time was inauspicious, the Oba was in the midst of the sacred Ige festival, when traditionally no foreign visitors were permitted. Phillips set out with a party of 9 British officials, 2 trading agents, 250 African carriers, and interpreters. They carried with them gifts for the Oba, but also hidden survey equipment and empty cases, presumably to bring back artifacts. What happened next is a matter of historical debate. British colonial accounts claim a treacherous ambush. Benin oral histories suggest a defensive action against perceived invaders during a sacred period. What is undisputed is that near the village of Ugbene, Philip's expedition was attacked by Benin forces. 7 British officials, including Philip himself, and many African carriers were killed. A few survivors, including Boisragan and Ralph Locke, managed to escape through the forest and return to British territory with tales of what the British press would soon label a massacre. But was this truly an unprovoked attack? Or was it the desperate action of a sovereign nation attempting to protect itself from colonial encroachment? And how would this incident become the pretext for one of history's most devastating acts of cultural destruction? News of the Phillips party's fate reached London by telegraph on January 12, 1897. The British response was swift and decisive. Within days, Rear Admiral Harry Rawson, Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Navy's Cape Squadron, received orders to organize a punitive expedition against Benin. The mission was explicitly framed as retribution for the deaths of Phillips and his companions, but colonial correspondence reveals broader objectives. Colonial Secretary Joseph Chamberlain authorized the expedition on January 15th, writing, "The punishment of the massacre of the mission must be effected and the King of Benin removed from his throne." Military preparation moved with remarkable speed, a clear indication that plans for military action against Benin may have predated the Phillips incident. By early February 1897, Rawson had assembled a formidable force, 1,200 British Marines, sailors, and Niger Coast Protectorate troops. The expedition was organized into 3 columns that would converge on Benin City from different directions. On February 9th, they began their advance from the coast, equipped with Maxim guns, rocket launchers, and field artillery. Benin's warriors fought bravely to defend their capital, employing traditional tactics and weapons against vastly superior firepower. Earthen walls and ditches that had protected the city for centuries proved ineffective against modern artillery. By February 18th, all 3 British columns had fought their way to the city's outskirts. When British forces breached the palace gates on February 18th, 1897, they entered a world that defied every colonial stereotype about African civilization. Captain Boisragan marveled, "Brass work, the like of which can be seen nowhere else in the world, excepting perhaps in the Louvre." But admiration quickly gave way to systematic destruction. The palace that morning was not empty. Court officials, priests, and artisans who had served the royal household for generations watched in horror as soldiers with crowbars began prying the bronze plaques from walls where they had hung for centuries. Each plaque removal was like tearing a page from Benin's memory. Chief Obaseki, one of the few palace officials who survived to tell the story, later recounted, "They took our gods from their shrines. They wrapped our ancestors' faces in canvas like corpses. The spirits of our kings they put in wooden boxes. The British removed over 2,500 religious artifacts, royal regalia, and artworks. The brass plaques were taken down and crated." Naval Lieutenant P.H. Elworthy noted in his field diary on February 21st, "The collection and packing of the king's valuables, curios, etc. was completed by noon. Master caster Inenigo, whose grandfather had cast bronzes for Oba Esiga himself, wept as soldiers carried away not just artwork, but the visual archives of his people's history. Each bronze head held the spirit of an Oba," recalls a descendant of the guild. To remove them was not theft of objects, it was theft of souls, theft of connection between the living and the ancestors. The ivory tusks carved with intricate scenes of royal ceremonies and historical events, some taking master carvers years to complete, were loaded onto carts like timber. Objects that had been consecrated in elaborate ceremonies, blessed by priests, and regarded as vessels connecting the earthly and spiritual realms, were now reduced to exotic loot. But the ultimate desecration was yet to come. On February 20th, 1897, British forces set fire to the royal palace compound. The flames that consumed the buildings also destroyed centuries of accumulated knowledge. wooden sculptures, manuscripts, ritual objects, and architectural details that had taken generations to perfect. The fire burned for 3 days. When it finally died down, the palace complex that had amazed European visitors with its sophistication was reduced to ash and rubble. The great courtyards where bronze casters had worked, where kings had held court, where artistic traditions had been passed from father to son for 20 generations, all gone. Oba Ovon Ramwen, who had initially escaped into the forest, could see the smoke from his hiding place miles away. He knew that what was burning was not just buildings, but the physical manifestation of his people's identity, their connection to their ancestors, their claim to greatness. In his official report to London, Rear Admiral Rawson wrote, "I am happy to report that the punitive expedition against Benin has achieved complete success." But what exactly had they succeeded in doing? They had destroyed a center of learning and artistic achievement that had flourished for centuries. They had scattered the visual records of African greatness to the winds. They had silenced the bronze voices that had spoken of kingdoms and queens, of artistic genius and spiritual depth, of a people's right to determine their own destiny. As the HMS Theseus and HMS Malacca prepared to sail from Lagos Harbor, carrying their cargo of crated treasures, few could have imagined that this act of cultural destruction would still reverberate more than a century later. The bronzes were no longer sacred objects or historical records. They had become evidence of one of history's greatest cultural crimes. Oba Ovon Ramwen eventually surrendered and was exiled to Calabar, where he died in 1914, never again seeing the palace of his ancestors. The Kingdom of Benin, which had maintained its independence for over 700 years, was absorbed into Britain's Nigerian protectorate. But in London's auction houses and Europe's great museums, another story was about to begin. The transformation of sacred art into commercial commodity, the final insult in a conquest that had already taken everything else. And why has this event, perhaps the single largest displacement of cultural heritage in African history, remained relatively obscure in global historical consciousness? In March 1897, the HMS Theseus and HMS Malacca arrived at Plymouth Harbor, carrying crates filled with treasures from Benin. The British government claimed the right to seize the artworks as spoils of war, a concept already contested in international law at that time, but still widely practiced. What happened next transformed a military seizure into a commercial enterprise. To help defray the expedition's costs, estimated at £40,000, equivalent to over £5 million today, the Foreign Office decided that most of the Benin objects would be sold rather than kept as government property. Within weeks of their arrival in Britain, the process of commodification began. The objects were divided into categories. Items deemed of greatest artistic significance were offered to the British Museum. Others were shared among expedition members as prize possessions, and the remainder were prepared for public auction. On May 25, 1897, an advertisement appeared in the Times. Stevens Auction Rooms, 38 King Street, Covent Garden, Benin City bronzes, antique and other African curios from the recently captured city of Benin. The catalogue listed over 300 items, described as curious specimens and barbaric art. Charles Hercules Redd, the British Museum's curator of ethnography, moved quickly to secure what he recognized as extraordinary pieces. In a report to the museum's trustees dated June 10, 1897, he wrote, "These works of art are of the very highest interest, proving conclusively that before the advent of Europeans, the natives were capable of producing work of a very high order." The British Museum ultimately acquired approximately 900 items, the single largest collection of Benin artifacts anywhere in the world. Other institutions, from Germany's Museum für Völkerkunde in Berlin to the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, also purchased significant numbers. Wealthy collectors competed for the remaining pieces. By 1900, Benin's royal art was scattered across museums and private collections in at least 20 different countries, from Russia to the United States, from Austria to Australia. The monetary value of these objects skyrocketed. Items that had been auctioned for pounds in 1897 were, by the 1920s, selling for hundreds or thousands. But what was the true cost of this dispersal? How did the removal of these cultural touchstones affect the Benin people's connection to their history? And as these sacred objects became commodities in a global art market, what happened to the knowledge and context that gave them meaning? The early 21st century witnessed a profound shift in the global conversation about colonial-era artifacts. New voices, new technologies, and new ethical frameworks challenged the status quo that had kept the Benin bronzes largely in Western institutions for over a century. In 2007, a crucial development occurred with the formation of the Benin Dialogue Group, a forum bringing together representatives from Nigerian cultural institutions, the Royal Court of Benin, and European museums holding significant Benin collections. Though initially focused on collaboration rather than restitution, this represented the first sustained multilateral discussion about the future of the bronzes. Nigerian artist and scholar Peju Laiwola, great-granddaughter of Oba Ovonramwen, became a powerful advocate through exhibitions like Benin1897.com, Art and the Restitution Question, in 2010. In her catalogue essay, she wrote, "The pillage of Benin remains an open wound. Every bronze item in Western collections represents not just artistic achievement, but unresolved historical trauma." Digital technology offered new possibilities. The Digital Benin project, launched in 2020, created a comprehensive online database of Benin objects across 131 institutions in 20 countries, allowing virtual reunification while physical items remained dispersed. For the first time, the full scale of the diaspora of Benin's heritage became visible. In March 2021, Germany announced a breakthrough commitment to return substantial Benin collections held in its museums. In October that year, Jesus College, Cambridge returned a bronze cockerel to Nigeria, the first British institution to permanently repatriate a Benin bronze. University of Aberdeen followed with the return of a bronze head. France returned 26 artifacts to Benin Republic, neighboring Nigeria, that had been taken from the Kingdom of Dahomey in a similar colonial expedition. Yet the British Museum, holder of the largest collection with approximately 900 pieces, maintained its position against permanent returns, citing the British Museum Act of 1963 that legally prevents deaccessioning. Instead, it proposed a loan arrangement for the planned Edo Museum of West African Art in Benin City. In November 2022, the Smithsonian Institution made history when its National Museum of African Art officially transferred ownership of 29 Benin bronzes to Nigeria. Board Chair Lonnie Bunch stated, "This decision is consistent with what we know is right and just." By 2024, approximately 600 items had been returned or committed for return, about 15% of the estimated total taken in 1897. Each repatriation ceremony became a powerful moment of historical reconciliation. Yet thousands of objects remained in Western collections, their future uncertain. But what is the rightful place for these contested objects in the 21st century? Can digital access replace physical repatriation? And as the balance shifts, what new ethical questions arise about preservation, access, and the role of museums in a post-colonial world? In the words of Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka, the restitution of Africa's cultural heritage is not about looking backward, but about looking forward, about establishing relationships based on respect rather than domination, about acknowledging that the great museums of the world must find a new purpose beyond displaying the spoils of empire. The Benin bronzes, these masterpieces of human creativity, continue their journey through history. Created to honor kings, scattered by colonial violence, celebrated in foreign museums, and now beginning their return home, they have become something their creators could never have imagined. Symbols in a global conversation about justice, reconciliation, and the power of art to connect us across time.